Hi, my name is Doug Vogt from the Die-Hole Foundation, and this is Series 9, Part 2 on Joseph as he sold the food that he was growing to basically feed the rest of the world. For that reason, I wore my food tie. I hope you like it. Anyway, these are the things we're going to cover in this video. How Joseph became the richest man in the world, and he's not kidding. Where he hid the gold after he received it from the sale of the grain. In other words, when he sold it, he had an intermediate place where he put the gold. Not the final resting place. You already figured out by the code systems Moses given that he put it into the family burial. Okay, but that came later. Why he brought his family into Egypt, where they were from where they were living to Goshen in Egypt, south of Tanis. I should say north of Tanis. Where the final disposition of the gold and silver went. Again, some of this is going to come from chapter 10 in God's Day of Judgment. This is the philosophy book from, 12 years ago now. And the paperback's available. The hardback is no longer available. Volume 2 is what we're going to be covering here. To understand the code systems, because that's how you have to extract the true story out of the book, you have to really read Moses and the 10 code systems, because that's what he used to encode this thing. Volume 1, it was Series 8 in 2 parts. I've gotten some emails or comments from people saying one woman said I should repent. I think she was so married or convinced the surface story was real, but I don't think she read or saw Part 1 and 2 of Series 8, because she'd know, certainly as a woman, that you're not giving birth at the age of 90 years old. But hopefully she will see those 2 videos first, and she'll understand what's really going on. And these are some of the videos here. The 10 code systems you actually have to know in order to extract this thing. And finally, the creation of the Hebrew alphabet. You understand why this story is so disjointed and what he had to do. And he had a very, very difficult time trying to create a surface story. Appreciate that. By the way, it is a true story. If it's a fairy tale or a fantasy like some alleged holy books are, the hero always looks good, never does anything bad. In this story, you found out they got some problems. They're just human. That's what you have to understand. They're just human beings, just like us. They have frailties, let's call them that. Okay, a recap of Part 1 of this Series 9. This is Joseph. In Egypt, he is known as Sanmut, and I proved it in the first Part 1. He is Sanmut. Sanmut is Joseph. This is the woman who purchased him. As she went by the name of, or Moses calls her Potiphar, and later he calls her Potipharah, but it's still one and the same person. And let me see what I can say about her. She was married to Pharaoh Tutmosis II, and as I show, he was really ugly, and she's gorgeous. And she basically married her half-brother. And he was well inbred, and it said he was slow-witted, stupid and dumb and ugly. So and we know from Joseph and what Moses tells us, he was a good-looking guy. So she saw him and said, I'm going to buy him, he's mine. And it appears by the code systems he was a slave or a houseboy for about 5 years, and after that, something happened. And I think it may be that she wound up arranging the death of her husband, the gargoyle, so she could have a full-time relationship with him. I'm sure that after the 4 or 5 years after he was purchased, they had a daughter together. Well, this is Tutmosis II's real daughter, and her name was Nephuri. She had a daughter from Joseph. Her name was Mitri. And what she did, when I covered in the previous video, is when she was already acting as Pharaoh, because her husband was already dead, maybe already 2 years. And she already had a loving relationship with Joseph, and I'm sure she freed him. He was no longer a slave. And to make sure she stayed in power and her daughter would stay in power after her, she, under what Moses tells us as Potipharah, she gives her daughter that she had from Tutmosis II, her, to Joseph as his wife. By then, she's probably in their mid-teens or maybe late teens. And that's what she did. And she took the daughter that she had with Joseph and gave that to Tutmosis III, who was maybe, they think, 3 years old, maybe 4 years old. She swapped babies, in other words. And she did that so her daughter would have a better claim to the throne than Tutmosis II. That's what she did. So, I'll go on. That's a little family history. You should see really part 1 to get the whole gory details. Okay, as shown in the previous one, these are the offices that Sanmut, a.k.a. Joseph, had. Overseer of the tens of Upper and Lower Egypt, which was the overseer of all the lands of Egypt, and that was in Genesis 41:41. I give the citations in the Hebrew scriptures, Genesis, here so you understand it's the same thing. Overseer of the buildings of the god Amun, which was in charge of the temple lands. Now, he was also the head of the temple of Hathor, the fertility god. So he was in charge of 2 temples. Amun was the main religion, and he had this other one, Hathor. Overseer of the cattle of Amun, in charge of the cattle, key they received in trade for the food. When the Egyptians ran out of money, they gave all their cattle and all their farm animals to him, and he wound up owning them, at least the Pharaoh wound up owning them. Overseer of the double granary of Amun, which means in charge of the food storage facilities and building more of them. And you'll see Sukkot, where it is and what it looked like. Overseer of the gardens of Amun, which means all the temple lands to grow food. Overseer of the gods' storehouses, orchard, and other property. Temple administration. Overseer of the royal lands, overseer of the royal lands. Again, that was in the Torah, and the first part is what was listed by Egyptologists of the offices that Sanmut had. Overseer of works, construction, engineering, architecture, which means in charge of storehouses and other public works. He had to, I'm sure, build docks, canals, and lots of storage facilities. Also, his girlfriend / Pharaoh was the biggest builder of any of the pharaohs before her. And so he was evidently in charge of building. Steward of her estate, overseer of the household of Potiphar, and there's a reference. Here's some pictures. These were on the walls of a tomb of Mina, who was a overseer of lands at the time of Menahophis III. So here they're actually measuring off using rope how much of the field the Pharaoh would get. Now Joseph had made a deal, which you'll find out later, that after the Egyptians sold their land to him, actually to the Pharaoh, the tax was basically 20% of their harvest, their crop. Now those of you who live in New York City are paying about 50 to 55% of your income to federal, state, local government. You're in worse shape than they were, so don't laugh at them. Look in the mirror and say, I'm a sucker. Anyway, these were taken from another tomb of Egyptians sifting out the grain, harvesting the grain, and here's harvesting grain too, just to show you what it looked like. Storing the grain products, Genesis, and in the 7 plenteous years the earth brought forth in heaps, and he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. The food of the field which was round about every city laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sands of the sea, very much until he left numbering, for it was without number. No inventory control. And he had a huge amount of grain. Huge amount. Now we get to the technical end of how he stored it and how he sold it. This is actually an old British map that goes back to 1939, 1940 of Egypt. It's been actually very helpful. This is Tel El Maskuta. They found a stela there, a monument stone, that called it Sukkot, S-U-K-O-T. The Jewish holiday S-U-K-K-O-T is really about the same place, but they don't understand why it's called Sukkot. When I get to video series, the next one, 10, you're going to understand why it's so important and what the holiday of Sukkot is really all about. So anyway, the blue is the canals, as it is today. There's actually a few more canals here too. The reason why it rambles on like this is because they had so many storehouses in this area that they basically take the wheat, they put it on barges, and they barged it down to here, down to a canal, down to past the Bitter Lakes. I'll show it to you in a second. This is actually pictures from my second expedition there, was the first, I forgot, to Sukkot, where we found it. Actually, I didn't. An archaeologist about 10 to 15 years before me had done the excavation here. He asked me to get some samples for him, which I did. So this is what it looks like, and they were buried about 2 to 3 feet below current ground level, so people built their houses on them, and they don't realize they've got the artifacts of these warehouses, storehouses underneath them. So this is another view of it. Here's another. You can see the mud brick here, all laid out like this. You can see the mud brick layers a little better, all through this whole area, and people's houses on top. Here's another view of it. Pretty good. Here's more of it. Here's some more. This is all that's left. Remember, what you're looking at is something that's 3,500 years old. Here's an ancient well. It's not used today, but it's ancient. We don't know how many thousands of years old it is. Here's another view of what the buildings look like. Here's an aerial view. Here's the canal. This was once the 8th branch of the Nile. Here's one of the canals. Here's another one, another canal. This is the one that was on that old map. They evidently did another one also to bring water to other parts of irrigation. And these are the places I went here and I went there. So here's another spot, here's another spot. This whole area was nothing but storage houses, as well as further down about 10 miles this way, there was some that they built underground. So it was submerged and they found them by accident. Here's another aerial view, a little close up. You can see where these holes are, and these were the storage facilities. Some of these may have been the ones that were dug into the ground. It's pretty extensive. This is where we were, and you can tell the rectangular shape of what was underneath here at one time. But you see it's extensive. A huge area, all loaded with grain products. I don't know if it was just wheat, rye, barley, a combination of those. We don't know exactly. I'm sure it was wheat and barley. This is some pottery shards we picked up. They match the same pottery that was in the Egyptian Museum, dating of this time, 3,300 to 3,500 years ago. So this is where I turned this thing sideways. Actually, north is this way. So Tel El-Maskuta is around here. So they would put it on the barge, and this is the Suez Canal. So this wasn't here then, but I'm sure there was a river along here because it emptied into the the Great Bitter Lake. So it went across here. He barged the wheat to here and down, and this down like this. Now, this is the Suez Canal. There is actually an old ancient canal that's along this area, and you'll see that in a second. And that's how they bring it to, this is Suez City. At the time it was called Elim. That was the name of the city. It was E-L-I-M, is what the Hebrews call it. And the 7 years of famine began to come, according to Joseph, and said, and the drought was in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. The first year, this is Genesis. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh and said, cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, go to Joseph, that he saith to you, do. In other words, they had to go to Joseph to buy the wheat. Now, obviously Joseph isn't in all of Egypt. He had agents that worked for the Pharaoh, for him, to sell the wheat, collect the money, and bring it back to the treasury. We just don't know whose treasury. I imagine if some of it was sold from the temple of Amun or the temple of Hathor, something stuck to him. And the famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians. And the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. The second year. This is where it gets interesting. And there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very sore, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan fainted by the reason of famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan. Now I want to go through some of that. Tutmosis III was kind of a conqueror, they call him. He had a battle in Megiddo in Canaan, and it wasn't much of a battle that the Canaanites put up. It gives you an idea that they were really just broke, but it wasn't much of a battle. But he basically bought them. He bought the land of Canaan. They didn't have to have an army, he just bought them. You want food? Then fine. The Pharaoh now owns you and your land. For the corn which they brought, and the Joseph brought the money unto Pharaoh's house. I assume he means the treasury. At least this is a story that Moses is selling, is telling us. I shouldn't say selling, telling us. The temple of Amun and Hathor had lots of food from their storehouses. Joseph controlled both. As they say, it's good to be king, you know? And when the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came unto Joseph and said, give us bread, for why should we die in thy presence, for the money faileth. By the end of the second year, Joseph took all their cattle and other farm animals in trade for food. By verse 19, same year, the Egyptian people became bondmen to Pharaoh. They became his slaves, his property. In case, really, her property, I should correct myself. And Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians sold every man his field, because the famine prevailed over them, so the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he removed them to cities from one end of the borders of Egypt, even to the other end thereof. And they said, thou hast saved our lives, let us find grace in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's bondmen. You notice what they did. They took the guy's land, they took the people's land, they moved them to cities. If that sounds familiar in many socialist and communist states, you're right. That's what they do. So the state owns it all, and they own your ass too. Okay, this is Suez City now, also known as, previously known as Elim. And this is actually an existing canal, probably the one that that Joseph had. And it goes to a marshy area here, or a lake, and it goes down to here and empties into here. This wasn't there at the time. Pretty sure of it. This is the canal. So someplace around in here, this looks like a dock area, was the trading was done. Maybe the ships were over here and they trucked it over here and then they loaded up and he collected the money and he gave some of it to Pharaoh, and you'll see in a second. Moses actually tells us what happened. Actually, the legends do. Moses hints at what Joseph took for payment in Deuteronomy 33:14. And from the greatness of income of the sun and from the greatness of the driven out of the moon, taken from the moon. That's the literal translation. I didn't like the one that we normally have. The literal one was actually a little better, more descriptive. The color of the sun is yellow, like gold, and the color of the moon is white, like silver. So he's telling us what medium of exchange he took for the payment of the wheat, the rye. The wealth of the world which Joseph had acquired through the sale of the corn he had stored during the 7 years of plenty, he had divided into 3 parts. This is important. The first part he surrendered to Pharaoh, his girlfriend. The second part he concealed in the wilderness. This is a coded name, wilderness, one of the 7 he uses to describe Mount Sinai, where it was found by Korah, though it disappeared again, not to come to view until the Messianic time, and then it will be for the benefit of the pious. The third part Joseph hid in the sanctuary of Baal-zephon, where the Hebrews carried it off as booty. Now, really, it went to here first, then it went to Mount Sinai. And I'm going to explain in this video and the next one how it finally got to Mount Sinai and how he concealed it. You see, what's interesting is you have an oral history, that's the legends. The legends are and sometimes very helpful. It flat out says Baal-zephon, and you'll understand why. So it's not a temple of pagans. One legend said that, or some people think that. It's not. Moses gave us a hint where the gold was stored when he said, we spoke unto the children of Israel that they turn and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, I don't even know how to pronounce that, between Migdol and the sea. This is at the time of the Exodus and the crossing, when they're on the west side of the Bay of Suez. Over against Baal-zephon, before it shall ye encamp by the sea. The location of where the crossing was, by the Bay of Suez, is this. This is longitude and latitude, 29 degrees, 49 minutes, 30 seconds. The latitude is what you care about. The location of Baal-zephon is, the longitude is going to be different because it's further further east. By latitude 29, 54, 26. It's only 5 minutes further north than the crossing. That's why Moses says it's over against. No, it's over opposite. But no one thought it was on the other side of the Bay of Suez and another 16 or so miles. He's giving you a clue where the thing is. The first step was taking the word Baal-zephon apart and finding out what it really meant. The Hebrew spelling for Baal-zephon is that. The first part of the word means possess. The second part of the word means hidden treasure. Could it be more obvious? He's beating you over the head with it. That's why you have to know the code systems of Moses. That's why that book is so important, Moses 10 Code Systems. Otherwise, you're a prisoner of the surface story, which is not the story. There's another way of the meaning could be extracted from it. The first part of the word, Baal, is a close approximation of the Hebrew word bala, which means to be worn out or wasted, which is maybe the best interpretation, as you'll find out in a second. So it'd be a worn out hidden treasure. This is what happened. Here's Elam, Suez City. This is where he transacted. I marked it from here. I studied some of the maps and also was there. And there is a dirt road that goes in this direction. There's one that goes down this way, and here is Baal-zephon here. You're going to see it in a second. This is from that old British map, which was actually very helpful. Here's a satellite photo courtesy of Google. It says it's 28.7 kilometers, or about 18 miles as the crow flies. So maybe 20 miles. He could easily do this with a wagon in 4 hours, 5 hours, and then come back by the end of the day. So he'd only be gone not even a whole day. Now, this is what Baal-zephon was. Remember, the second translation was a worn-out treasure. In 1966, I did gold mining with my geology professor and a guy named Dave Tybel in Mount Pinos just north of LA. And the summertime of '67, between junior college and regular college, I did gold mining with Dave Tybel up in the Klondike, where we did placer mining. So I knew what gold mining looked like, both hard rock and placer mining. Well, when I walked around here, I saw a bunch of quartz on the ground. And I knew exactly what happened. This is one time a river or a drainage area. There was a quartz vein running across here. This water intersected the quartz vein that contained gold. It came down here. This is their ancient tailings or diggings for gold. The interesting part is right up here. You're going to see it in a second. See all this path? Once you have a path in a desert environment, it stays there forever because nothing grows there to wash it away and there's no rain. Here's a little bit closer. See, this path goes like this and that, and right here is the interesting part. Here's the vein. Here's a closer view of the same area. And right here, you're going to find out what was there. You're going to find out what this is too. This is the last end of an old gold mine. Now, there was more to this mine. See these sharp edges here on the edge of the rock? That means that's not natural. That means there was a lot more to this cave system, or this mine, but it got removed. And the one who removed it was the Egyptians. Evidently, after the Exodus, they followed where Moses went by locals telling them where they saw him. And they figured out what Joseph had done and where he stashed the gold as an intermediate place. So they destroyed about 30 or 40 feet of this thing. Because when we walked up to it, it was only like 30 or 40 feet up. Joseph didn't like work too much, no physical work. So he brought his wagon only about 70 feet away from the entrance of this thing, and he walked up a slight hill, and he loaded this cave system up with gold until he filled it up. This is the vein. Goes like this. And the cave is that end over there. And it was a quartz vein. You can see it down here. Here's another picture. This is inside the cave, that mine. Here's the quartz vein here. A little bit's over here. The Bedouin left his jacket there. Here's the rest of it looking the other direction. You see it go like this, goes around like that, like that. They were following the quartz vein for the gold. Joseph had the additional problem of how to conceal the gold and silver he had taken, so no one could know what he was doing. Moses, in essence, told us in Genesis 42:35, when the brothers emptied their grain sacks and found their money in the sack with the grain they just bought. The second time was in Genesis 44:1, when Joseph instructed that the brothers' money be put again in their grain sacks. What this guy did is, grain sacks would not bring any attention to anybody. So when he collected the money from the Pharaoh, I don't know if he took 2/3. That would be a hell of a lot of weight. But he took a bunch of it, maybe a third of it. And he he concealed the grain sacks. Here's current day grain sacks, but here's an Egyptian about that period. Here's a grain sack. He's a whole lot of grain sacks. It's about the same size, same purpose. You know, this is burlap. God knows what they use here, but that's what a grain sack looked like. They sewed it up. And he must have put some grain in it and the gold in here. And loaded up his cart or his wagon, went to Baal-zephon, shoved it into the cave, sealed up the cave again. Because it was spent gold mine, there was no gold mining going on then, so it predates him. And nobody was out there. So it was pretty safe. He sealed up the cave and went back, and nobody ever missed him. God knows how many times he did this. Okay, Jacob and the family coming to Egypt. Now explain what the problem was. As you saw by some of the quotes that Moses gives us, he sold a lot of wheat just that first year. He had a lot of gold and silver. And he evidently must have filled up that Baal-zephon, that spent gold mine. He had a problem of where do you put it? How do you steal it and put it away someplace? Now he had the temple of Amun and he had the temple of Hathor, and maybe rooms in there he can get away with it. So what I think now his family he knew had a nice big cave. The problem was the family was living there. That's the homestead. So how does he get them to come to Egypt, away from the cave? So he knew that they were eventually going to come to buy grain, because everybody was coming to him. And he knew where it was in the Sinai. It was a savanna, drought, you know, they weren't going to make it. So he knew eventually they're going to show up, but he's not going to see everybody that's coming to town to go buy grain. Too many people. He must have told his assistants, the people who work for him, and work for the granary, when somebody comes, if some group of guys come from that part of the Sinai, send them to me. Might even told a couple of their names. Send them to me. So I take it from there, keep this in mind. Jacob realized he had to buy food from Egypt so all of the family could live. Genesis 42:1. Get you down hither and buy for us from hence, that we may live and not die. In other words, this is important. Without Joseph knowing what he learned inside that cave, from whatever the device it was, he then knew how to interpret his girlfriend's dream to start growing a lot of food. And during the 7 years of drought, he could sell it. He saved millions of people, including his own family. If he hadn't done what he did, he might have survived, but his family wouldn't. There wouldn't have been any Hebrews, none whatsoever. No Torah, no alphabet, no nothing. They all would have been dead. And Jacob and Moses is admitting it here. 10 of Jacob's sons went down into Egypt to buy food grains. Joseph put their money back in their respective grain sacks with the grain. Simon must have been the first to suggest killing Joseph 28 years before. This is called getting even. And took from them Simon and bound him before their eyes. So what Joseph told them, I'm trying to condense this story, he wound up accusing them of being spies. He knew who they were. And so he took one of the brothers, Simon, probably because he's the guy who was first suggested to kill him. Probably also Levi and maybe his younger brother Benjamin too. But anyway, so he says, I'm going to keep him. And the next time I see you, I want you to bring the youngest one, Benjamin. Well, he doesn't say Benjamin, the youngest one among you. Bring him here. So anyway, they go back home to Jacob. They open up their grain sacks and they find, oh my God, he put the money back into the bags. They were deathly scared. Let me go on further. And it came to pass as they emptied their sacks that behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their fathers saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. So now Jacob lost another son, Simon. He's stuck in Egypt in a prison. The second trip by the brothers with Benjamin, it was Joseph required them to bring Benjamin. Don't come and see my face unless you bring Benjamin. They were stuck. So we learn that his brothers came down in the second year of the famine. 5 more years were yet to come. Genesis 44:1. Fill the men's sack. This is what Joseph tells his servants. Men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put every man's money in his sack's mouth, in the top of the sack. So, but he did something else also. The younger one, Benjamin, was with them, and he had a dinner with them, and he after dinner, he instructed the servant to put not just the money in there, but also a silver goblet, and put it into Benjamin's sack. So they did. Then either the next day or a few hours later, like 8 or 10 hours later, he winds up having his servants, his men, go out and said something was stolen. He's entrapping them. And they look in, and in Benjamin's sack is this goblet. So he calls him a thief. He's going to hold him and say, bring your father next. And the brothers wind up saying, now this is the surface story that Moses is telling us. So we don't know if it's totally true. Keep that in mind. That they tell Joseph that the father lost one of the brothers. If he loses this one, he's going to die. So finally, the surface story says Joseph cries and he reveals himself to his brothers, gives them a whole bunch of money, carts and everything like that to bring the father, bring the whole family into Egypt, which is what his original goal was. Remember, he's got to get the family away from the family homestead, what the cave is, so he could load that cave up with a lot of gold. That's what his object was. So yeah, he's a nice guy. He did something great and saved millions of people, but he was a real schemer. This guy was smart and a real schemer. No question about it. This guy was brilliant. And Joseph sustained his father and his brethren and all his father's household with bread according to their little ones. But as for you, his brothers, ye meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive. True. The reason Jacob blessed Ephraim was because he must have known about the hoard of treasure hidden inside the family cave, and he knew why Joseph named his younger son Ephraim. Like I tell, Ephraim and Ephraim Ephron is very close in pronunciation. The prophecy he gave for Joseph is not really a prophecy. Well, they call it in the book blessings. It's not blessings at all. It told me that Jacob also was using some device inside that cave to tell him what the future was. In this case, was the future of his sons. So, with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that resting place beneath. This verse was very interesting, so I looked at it more closely. The Hebrew word rebitz is translated a couching or resting place, hence resting place, like a burial cave, which would be certainly the burial cave of Machpelah, which is the family burial cave. In the Torah, there is a tesadi, or T, at the end of the word, which is equal to 400 in large numbering, which means that's the amount of silver that Abraham paid to buy the cave and the mountain and the land around it. Moses is plainly telling us gold and silver Joseph put into the family cave. It is not me conjecture. This is Moses telling us repeatedly, and you saw how many names he embeds it in. He gives the clues. So those of you who are so, I don't want to use the word brainwashed, but convinced that the surface story is right, you've been taught this in Sunday school, in yeshiva, you're wrong. Your teachers don't know this stuff. They never did. And their teachers didn't know. This stuff, most of it was lost at the close of the first temple, 2,600 years ago. 5018. This is going to lead us into part 3 of the video. I'll explain everything. And his brethren also, this is after Jacob dies. The brothers are saying, oh my God, we are in trouble here, what we did to him. And his brethren also went and fell down before his face, and they said, behold, we are thy bondmen. They were his personal property. The next video, part 3 of this, how Joseph covered up where the final location of the gold and silver was located, who helped him. Remember this, dead men tell no lies, or tell no tales rather, sorry. Which Pharaoh enslaved the 11 tribes, why 11 of the 12 tribes went into slavery, the real family tree of the Levites and the Ephraimites, who Aaron and Moses are actually related to. I hope you enjoyed it. You're getting a better, more accurate picture than ever before of what Moses is really telling us about his family and what happened to them. And I hope you appreciate it. I hope that you try to see the earlier videos, certainly the one on the code system, the Hebrew alphabet, so you can better understand what's really going on here. This is still not religion. This is still history. For those of you who are atheists or agnostics, you look at this as history because that's really what it is. It's not a pretty history, it's just the truth, which nobody likes to hear anyway nowadays. Anyway, I should be done with part 3 within a few days, 3 or 4 days, and I'll have it up.